Hi, this is the Permaculture podcast. Discover Permaculture on this podcast, and this episode's about food security and how we use permaculture design to create true permaculture designed security. Our food security is full of stories, decades of experience, and it helps people move from anxiety to empowered action. And I have with me Ben Missimer in Mississippi, Eric Seider in Sacramento, and Sam Parker-Davies right outside here in Zaytuna Farm, where I'm talking to you from. So you don't have to wait for governments or supermarkets to fix food problems. You can start today right where you are in your own garden, in your own suburb, designing systems that will feed you, your family, and help your local community understand what it is that really gives us nourishing food security. So when I walk past the supermarket, I don't think about food security so much. I think about how fragile it is. How many calories are on the shelves, and what is the quality of that? What's the not only the value, but how much food is there? We not often talk about 9 meals in the supermarket for each of us, and then we're in trouble. It might even be less. But in your own garden, the yield just keeps coming because it's a self-replicating system that you manage. So understanding food security is really important. It's what we're going to talk about and delve into here so that people have more of an understanding of it's not just about trucks and tins and how you hide food away while there's a catastrophe. It's how you continuously live in food abundance, productive ecosystems by design. And there's a lot more diversity in there than most people realize. So let me throw it out there, guys. There's a lot of talk in the media about food security, but how fragile is the current global food system and why is it fragile? What do you reckon? Who's going to pick it up?
It's extremely fragile, and because everything's being trucked in or on a boat or an airplane, and we're not growing food where we live, which, as Bill always said, every settlement should provide for all its own needs. And you referenced the 9 meals on a shelf. So the famous quote, "We're only 9 meals from anarchy," which basically means once people are faced with starvation, they start doing things that they would normally be unthinkable for themselves.
I think every siege, they say, in history ended up in cannibalism, right? And that's not a nice scenario. Sam, what do you reckon? You're the youngest on the team. You've got a
Well,
lot to
so I,
face yet.
yeah, I mean, I look at the future of my generation and the generations that are following me, and I look at history, what's happened historically. I mean, we faced World War II and World War One, where cities actually still did grow their own food, where there was food grown in most cities. And today we're in a situation where that is not normal at all. There is not food grown in cities. And we're looking the threat of what could possibly happen around the world with oil price crises, with all the things that we're reliant on for the transportation of food being in total upheaval. If there was war, if there was a problem with oil being delivered to different areas, and we are in a situation where there are lots of the globe actually facing food scarcity and food problems. We see what's happening in Gaza, people being starved en masse. We see food problems in Sudan. We see food problems all around the world. And maybe in the privileged West, we think that it could never happen to us, but we need to only look 80 years in the past, 100 years in the past, and it was happening to us. And that was when food was grown in our cities. So scouting forward into the future, we face real problems. We're facing a real issue, and food security is something we need to get on top of. It's a moral
Most people
problem.
don't realize the smaller the area, the more productive every square meter is. So,
Mm.
but if we actually count nutrition, well, we're way in front. Ben, you're in the southern states there in a pretty hot, humid climate like me. What do you reckon?
Well, I see out there generally three different types of people. Um, One person is in a complacent bubble where all of their needs are met, they have a job, they're secure, and they're not really feeling any pressure, and they don't want to hear anything alarming counter to that, to where they might be a bit vulnerable. And the middle guy here, he understands things are going on, but he's more focused on doing productive things and kind of bracing for impact, um, while non in a nonchalant way while he's getting his ducks in a row. And then the third type of person, he thinks there is no hope and doesn't feel the need to uh, do anything of the sort. So, I used to be this guy in and very satisfied in life, but sometimes things come along that poke your bubble, and you tend to be a bit alarmed and freaked out about one particular situation. But it provides you an opportunity to step back and kind of look at the system as a whole and all the different vulnerabilities that that you could face. And it's an alarming thing, and your immediate concern is for yourself and your family. And that is where I was, and that's what brought me into permaculture, is kind of a macro view of the world and feeling a little bit of anxious about it and seeing wave after wave of problematic things. This is what generally tends to lead people to the prepper mentality, where they're stockpiling, hoarding food. And that's where I was. I was 2 years deep, long into a high anxiety, problems of the world mindset, and I just didn't. I didn't stumble across anything like a creative solution that would help ease my anxiety. But luckily, I stumbled upon this podcast, which is a podcast for preppers, which Geoff goes on periodically. And Geoff Spirico, he was telling us about this guy Geoff Lawton, who had this really crazy project out in the desert, and he pointed to it, and that was my pivotal moment when I realized that if Geoff could do it here, he could do it anywhere. And that's when I stopped looking at so much negative stuff and more positive stuff. And it was at that moment when, well, shortly after, when Geoff Lawton had an online permaculture design course, which was a year-long, super intensive course, that I found in the last chapter of his course mentioned about bioregional organization. And that was really the pivotal thing. That was the linchpin of my whole focus in life, was to take the information he taught me in this class and impact my local community in profound ways. Um, in the prepper world, you have people called lone wolves, that they think that they don't need the help and support of their local community, and they can get by on their own needs. And that's like it's not really a good idea, because you might not be able to meet your own needs, and you don't have an established friendship and community with your local neighbors, and everybody's more of a threat than a cohesive sharing. But I I made a video here. If you go to my YouTube channel here, about a college for the future, and which advocates for finding a place. I don't know if this is a community college, but finding a place in your community, whether it's sponsored by your local college, your local government, or just people that that get it and they want to collaborate together on building this, building something where you can come together and learn. And who's building the seed banks in your local community, who's operating the local nursery operations on a large community town level, right? Who is advocating and setting up co-ops where you can bring your crops in and process them out into value-added products. Who's operating a local municipality's large compost operation? We need to be looking at bioregional organization and filling out all these individual jobs that help facilitate this local agrarian centric parallel economy that's going to provide us the support going on into the future. And looking at the onset of AI and what that means to our children and our jobs, we have to be finding roles that are going to combat that job loss and reroute it into a more productive, like I said, a parallel economy. And if we all take our yards, Geoff was mentioning somebody earlier, Eric Seider, who did a very productive food forest on a 1/4 acre of property. If everybody did that, this is kind of what it would look like. So I think really that is going to be the overarching way that we deal with all of these issues that we're talking about.
We don't really know the nutrition that's possible because of the diversity of food that we haven't fully explored in all the different assemblies. Eric Tonesmeyer's in Holyoke, Massachusetts, where they get about 2 foot of snow, 60 centimeters of snow every year. And yet he grows an enormous diversity of perennial food plants, just specializing on the perennials, not the annuals. Started off with 300, trialed 300, and settled on the best 200, I think it was. And that's something that can be done everywhere. So we haven't even put the assemblies together. We know it's possible. We know it's maximum potential. But what we've got to think about here is, are we about feeding people, or are we about creating nutrition? There's a big difference between maximum nutrition potential and just food. Just food to stop people being hungry and not high quality. What do you guys got? What's your experiences there with nutrition, providing people with the quality of diversity that we can put together? I find people don't understand it at all. They need. That's why I've got systems that say Tuna Farm. This is quite an older photo behind me, but crazy amount of diversity we put together here just to teach people. But you need lots of these, and you need lots of examples, because there's way more than we can even think about. I mean, you only have to put a few hundred food plants together in a different matrix, and you get hundreds of thousands of combinations. And then we've got to add in the climate and landscape and other. Makes for a beautiful world. What do you reckon, you guys? What's out there in the potential nutrition we can provide for people?
Well, for me, it's we've so conditioned to think of processed food as real food, and that we can't feed ourselves without industrial agriculture. So in an analogy to plants, like chemical fertilizers is equivalent to fast food. So you can get plumped up plants and plumped up people, but they're not healthy and they're vulnerable to diseases. Whereas if you have actual nutrient density in your food, one, you need to eat less of it. So therefore you need less area to grow the same amount of, like you always say, Geoff, you need less area to grow the nutrients versus the calories.
That's a split in thinking right there. Like your nutrition, it takes up very small space. It's really diverse. It's like Eric Tonesmeyer's diverse system in Holyoke, Massachusetts. Calories is a bit bulkier, but there's diversity in calories. We've only got the rice, wheat, soybean, and maize out there being traded on the stock market. We could have a lot more of that. I mean, there's loads out there. There's your cassavas and arrowroots and sweet potatoes and cooking bananas and all kinds of calorie crops, which are your bulk sort of carbohydrate crops. Sam, you're quite a gardener. Well, I reckon you are. You've got a pretty diverse sort of system on Zaytuna Farm here. Looks real funky. What do you think? I know you're a diverse maniac. So what is it? What is the difference between just feeding people and providing nutrition?
I think something that would shock a lot of people is how actually easy it is to be self-sufficient. But I think it's a mental block a lot of the time. People have a certain set of food that they've eaten, which has only been introduced to us within the last, I guess, between 50 and 100 years. So it's actually not that long in human history that we've been eating the way we're eating today. For a garden, like gardens I set up for people all over the place, for a garden to be working in a good way, to be providing people's needs self-sufficiently, it is not too complicated. It really isn't. It's about finding minimum work crops that provide good nutrition, and we can be very healthy and very well fed. So a person's nutrition, it requires only a few basic things for us to really get rolling. We need to get good greens into us. We need to have a good balance of carbohydrates, and we need to have a good source of protein. And our minerals come from that. Our full bellies come from that, and our health comes from that. And they're not easy to set up. I mean, we've all set up heaps. We've all set up a lot.
A lot of people tell me they survive on 2 hours work a day, self-sufficiency. Some people 10 hours a week, hour in the morning, hour in the afternoon, 5 days a week, and half an hour in the morning, half an hour in the afternoon, Saturday and Sunday. It's regular work. Can't put it all in one chunk so easily. It's every day you're doing a little bit, but you're not doing much over the year. So, a 300 or 400 hour year usually does it quite well. Where most of us are working 2,000 to 3,000 hours a year, and we've got nothing to show for it but gadgets and health held together by pharmaceuticals. So how does permaculture change the way we think about food security? How do you, as you've got your permaculture garden, what's the difference between the way you think in a sustainable way, in a permaculture way, than the average person who's relying on someone else to provide everything they need? How psychologically, what does that do to us? How do we change in the way the nutrition of our psychology is fed by it? Like, what happens there? Grab it. Come on, what do you reckon?
Yeah, well, it definitely eases anxiety for sure, and that's definitely a big part of health too. There at this point in time, there's a lot of kids that are moving back in with parents, and parents moving back in with kids. But as far as I've got my daughter living here with me, and I tell you, she's a tremendous help out there, and it's nice to get out there with the family. The time is limited, and we're all definitely stressed. But yeah, like Geoff was saying, just an hour or two a day to keep the plate spinning, if you will. And banking on perennial crops, and if you got retention ponds, stocking things with fish, these are all good. These are good, solid idea strategies to maintain not just food sovereignty but food security.
You still got plenty of time for family time or a little bit of work from home time. It's not like you're actually the permaculture work on the ground doesn't create time stress. It actually provides, if anything, we produce extra time in the day for people. You do whatever you want, work with the family or work from home or do something you love for work instead of something you hate. That's what I find. What do you reckon, Eric?
I think we need to accept the fact that if we're going to really be sustainable, we need food growing where we live. The idea that we can outsource our basic needs to some other people or some machines is just nonsense. So there's so many issues that are a corollary of outsourcing our basic needs. And then for me, it's just nothing gives me more peace and harmony than walking out my back door and seeing food growing around me.
psychologically, there's a great benefit. And so what's the difference for you, Sam?
I'll give a personal story real fast. My wife, she grew up in an area of Jordan where I wouldn't say there's anything close to food security, let alone water security, in the area. And the trend at the moment of these parts of the world that are developing is to gravitate towards American culture, to gravitate towards McDonald's and Pepsi and KFC and all these sorts of things, and to put great emphasis on it. And she moved here to Zaytuna with me, coming from that kind of setup. And the shock to the system was big, but very quickly, within a few months, she started noticing the difference in the taste of milk. Now she can't have milk that isn't from the farm. When we go out to drink coffee, she thinks it tastes like water. When we go and drink milk from outside. Carrots, big thing in carrots. She realized how sweet carrots were, how delicious carrots were. Didn't like carrots beforehand. Wasn't something that she liked much at all. Corn, all sorts of things. It totally opened her mind to what food really tasted like, and that the benefits to eating real food is it's nutritional, it's delicious, and I mean to the point where 5-star restaurants, they're looking for food that's grown well. And if you grow food well, it means you're growing it in good soil. It's got to be really fresh, so it's grown where you are. You eat a 5-star meal every meal if you're eating from the farm. You're eating what 5-star chefs look for every meal if you're eating from where you live. And that's a quality of life we've traded for something we consider convenient, but I just see a loss in quality of life. I don't see an improvement in quality of life. I see we've lost good taste of food. We've lost enjoyment of food. We've lost relationship and bonding when we're in the garden. Some of the conversations I have with people when we're gardening, they're conversations you couldn't have in another context. The health you feel from sticking your hands in vibrant, healthy soil and being outside with good people, it's foundational, I think, to the way we've lived for millennia. And now we've traded that for computer screens and tummy feelers that taste terrible. That taste real bad.
Time quality's disappeared. I'm gonna dob your wife in and say I can remember what seems like a long time ago, but it actually wasn't in time when we weren't sure we were gonna wean Sharuk off Pepsi.
Yeah.
And I don't think I think she wouldn't. I mean, she almost consider it poison now. I haven't seen her anywhere near any soft drink at all. I mean, it wasn't that long. I mean, we're not talking long. Like 12 months, it's gone for an extreme change in food understanding. And that's just from influence. That's just from your influence, our influence, being around it and having an example. Wait, just try it. So when was the first time? When was the first time that you felt the need to design for food security? When did you feel like I've got to design my food security? Was there a moment that you went, I'm just going to have to do it?
Sorry, go Ben.
Nah, all right. You got the B-roll. You can just play back my response from before. I kind of I shot my load early.
All right.
Yeah. So that was your moment, was that prepping changeover from full prep to full permaculture, and you just thought, I've got to do it.
Right. Yeah, that was the moment.
Eric, we've been working together nearly 20 years. Can you remember the moment?
Yes. When I was living in New York City. There's nothing more fragile about life when you're living in a city like that. And we've both been in New York City at the same time, so we had a good chuckle walking around, and how there's the nice facade until you go around the corner, and how grimy and dilapidated it really is. Which,
we do have a good laugh going around New York City. I remember well. It's almost surreal. But anyway, it maybe it shouldn't be funny, but we find it funny.
I think you got to have that perspective, a humorous perspective. Otherwise, the weight of it would get on top of you.
That's right. Yeah. it is the you didn't laugh, you cried type of thing, and it just seems
Oh,
like
it's not that bad. We're gonna lose our New York audience.
yeah, well,
We love New York. Yeah.
No, we don't.
it's funny with comparison anyway. So the aha moment, was there this aha moment? All I have to do was design this. I remember it with Bill. I remember it with, actually, I was kind of there just prior to it when I did my intro to permaculture, 1978, I think, with Max Lindegger. Max Lindegger described a food forest that I lived in the Caribbean when I was on a surfing trip, 3 months in Tobago, and he literally described a set of layers, almost the same assembly of species. And I'm thinking, I lived in one of them. I didn't think the local people knew what they were doing. I thought it was kind of a mess. But when I thought back into it, I thought actually there was a lot of food coming out, and they weren't really doing it. Didn't seem to be doing any work, just picking. And then when I did my course with Bill in '83, I was like, oh, okay. I can actually sit down and start designing this, putting it together like a living machine. And there was this design aha moment where I'm like, I can, like an engineer, as an engineer, I'm thinking about it from engineering component point of view. I think, how do I rev this thing up? I jumped from, I can design it. Can I rev it up? Can I make it go quicker? Can I get it to accelerate faster? You know, I was thinking, I was like, oh, I'm thinking like an engineer about living things for our benefit, you know, and instead of just transport, this is a supply line. So that was, it was a staged event for me, one by one. Went from realizing, oh, these things actually exist and people don't even know they've got them. And I've seen plenty of that since.
I still have realization moments along those lines. Like when I was in Iraq last, we were right on the Iranian border, and there was a food forest we visited along this waterfall area. And on arriving there, we kept hearing us that like the pomegranate suppliers of all of Iraq, like they supply the most amount of pomegranates. And I remember thinking like, oh, that not being that excited about it. As we were driving in, it was like quite mountainous landscape, and I was trying to imagine the pomegranate farms and where they would be. And I was looking for pomegranate farms as we were driving in. I couldn't see any. There were no pomegranate farms. And we were driving in, and we started getting inside this forest, and it was just forest, like all these different layers of species. I'm still looking for these pomegranate farms, and I start concentrating a little bit further. There were no pomegranate farms in the whole area. It was a food forest that was like thousands of years old, pretty much all native species. There were mulberry trees. I couldn't fit my arms around the trunk. I couldn't fit two people's arms around the trunk. Mulberries are native to the region. Pomegranates are native to the region. Figs are native to the region. Walnuts are native to the region. Hazelnuts are native to the region. And they were assembled in these layers of food forest that must have been thousands of years old. And that was those people's economy and their food security. That was just like, why would you trade this? Why would you give this up for industrial ag? If you could have fruit trees that grow themselves and replicate themselves, if you could be certain you're going to get all your food needs without needing to plant a crop all year round, why would you give that up? What sense do you have? And you look at that globally, that's been systems that have been all around the world. All around the world, systems like that have existed. The indigenous Australians have bunya nuts. They got these big bunya nut trees. They got nuts like that big inside them, and hundreds of them inside one pine cone. That's food security. That's totally logical food security. Why would we not invest in that? Why wouldn't we not desire that or want that around where we live? It just makes total sense.
I know why.
Yeah.
Because people don't want unsightly food falling on their front yard.
How unsightly?
It brings pests,
Free food should be illegal not to have instead of illegal to have. I mean, I've often said recently it should be illegal to sell food, not illegal to grow our own. I mean, it's the selling of it corrupts it quite a lot. and then we centralize around an economy without the consequence of our actions, which is, the most destructive thing we're doing is destroying our soils. So we've all worked at different scales, from balconies to broadacre farms. What changes and what stays the same? I have a student in Sydney who produces 20 kilos of food on a balcony every year, and is proud of it. I have a good student of mine, produces 13.5 tons of food per acre equivalent on 64 square meters. Angelo Eliadis in Melbourne, deep green permaculture. Anyone want to look it up? He documents every gram of production. He knows exactly what he gets. He crams 30 different fruit trees into 64 square meters, 12 varieties of berries, and 70 to 80 herbs and vegetables, and he's documented every bit of production. And people travel across the world to see his tiny micro-urban food forest, and the production is enormous per square meter. And we need people to understand that. How does design process shift from a balcony to a broadacre farm? How does that shift? How does your mentality shift? Like, what's the difference there? Sam, you covered a broad area there. I've just talked about a balcony. What happens when you stretch your design mind out? I'll give you one clue. I realize people think we have to add support species to small areas. You don't. You're the support species. Where you provide more energy than any support species you could design in, don't put them in. You are and Angelo's garden doesn't need any support species at 64 square meters. He is the support species. My student on a 20 square meter balcony producing 20 kilos, they're the support species. But the wider you go, the more you've got to get a partnership with living elements that are going to help support. But as designers, what happens? What happens to our design minds when we go from micro to macro?
Well, I look at the principles first. I mean, the principles don't change insofar as what we need to be self-sufficient, and then also what we need to produce in order to be self-sufficient. But the conceptual thinking does change. So if we're looking at broader scale management, I take the example of animals. We went support species. Support species also for us on broader landscapes is our animals. If we've got cows on a large landscape, we can manage our pasture and our grass effectively and get a good exchange. But as we go smaller and smaller, we need to be looking at things like quails, right down to worms. We're going to have a little worm farm on a small scale. We're not going to have a worm farm on a massive scale. It doesn't make any sense. But these are the sorts of things where when we have the things in balance, we're looking for the same thing. We're looking for fertilizer, which we get from cows, but we also get it from worms. So it's the same principles, just different scales of the same idea.
Yeah. Eric?
For me, it's all about density and intensity. So the smaller the scale, the more attention you have, and the more elements you can fit in. And when you go broader scale, you have to partner with the natural elements, or you're just going to work yourself into the ground. So I've spent more time in apartments and cities than I'd like to admit, but at the same time, it's given me a interesting insight into possibilities and restrictions. So I've had rooftop gardens in New York City, and Geoff, you and I both visited a bananas rooftop farm in Brooklyn, New York one time ago. And I've had balcony gardens in Texas. I had a fish pond on a balcony. That was pretty interesting. And then I discovered an interesting stacking functions technique I had a second story balcony where I was growing sweet potatoes. I had stacked up milk crate planters. So the bottom milk crate was sweet potatoes. So as long as the vine got out the front and it could expose to the sun, then I could stack something else on top of it that was growing. So you get real creative, and you really need to use your height, and you're basically farming in 3D in a smaller space.
Yeah, for me, I'm on 10 acres and I share my homestead with my childhood best friend and his family. And I find like 5 acres between us is, way more space than we need. I know 2.5 acres for a household. When you got people that are like on a tenth of an acre or a quarter acre putting out whatever tonnage of food, it's every landscape's different. It's like a snowflake, and you can't have everything, anything and everything that you might want on your dream sheet. You really have to analyze your terrain and figure out the holding capacity of your situation. If you only have 5 acres of grassy area that you'd like to put some cattle on, you're not going to put 50 cattle in there. You gotta you know you gotta you kind of have to size things in. And like what Sam was saying is, from a more macro cattle size down to maybe a worm farm is something more appropriate for your situation as far as a manure source. But you also have to consider, what are you going to be feeding your animals, what types of fodder, allowing space for that on top of your annual garden space. But you don't need 5 acres of annual garden space to meet a family's needs. You can dial that way down. So your annual plantings are really going to be the biggest time sink. The more you can bank on trees and animal systems and perennial crops, that's when your time allotment goes down, I think, for your input anyway.
What about patterns? What patterns remain consistent, you reckon? I mean, I think the smaller patterns
Well,
remain the same and the bigger patterns stretch.
yeah, you definitely have a lot more diversity in the terrain. And for a smaller property, like in somebody's quarter acre yard, an A-frame water level type of analysis on your slope and trying to figure out earthworks, that's cool. But like when you start getting up to a couple acres, it's really essential that you step back and take that bird's eye view and analyze all of those, seek out those patterns in the landscape and build accordingly.
Yeah, and you and I work on big landscapes, and the patterns get extreme.
Yeah, you really gotta step back and look at the watershed level and see how much is coming at you, and really plan, especially if you're doing dams and you're trying to size up your spillways. Really factor in all of that.
We're doing one right now, 66.8 square kilometers of catchment, thundering through and farms we're designing. So we're looking at that. Wow, the pattern's coming at us with energy when it comes, and we're in desert, and when it comes quick and it comes big. So, yeah, the patterns are the same, but the patterns are much more potentially energetic. So
yeah, if you got some good hills and valleys, it's really channeled to an area. But when you got really flat terrain, water is going to move. There's no such thing as flat. And when you have flat terrain and you're trying to plan around that, it could be a difficult read to understand the nuance of that movement. And that's where LiDAR comes in really handy, because you can see you can see the rocks. It's little pebbles. It's the detail is incredible. So you can follow all that movement very precisely.
a lot of people don't realize the subtle landscapes are a little bit more challenging to design because of those nuances. What patterns you guys remain the same? Eric, Sam,
Well,
scale
I
the
think, obviously water and soil are, if you don't get those right, it doesn't matter what scale you're at. You're, as Bill would say, uphill all the way. But I think edge is probably even more prominent the smaller and more intense you go, because you have more systems butting up against each other. And then also in the smaller systems, you are providing so much more of the inputs to the outputs you're getting. So you're such more of a factor. So I think the human patterning is becomes even more important in the smaller scale.
Well, you're jumping ahead
I
because we're going to talk about community in a minute. But like, how do we get the community to do this? And can we get the community to do this? Can we get like Sam? You touched on it. Like, if we've got the trees that actually grow wild in the assembly of food, why wouldn't you do it? But what do you got to say about it?
That was actually the pattern I was going to talk about. Was actually the patterning of human thought. I mean, the pattern that needs to remain the same is how we think about land, whether we're in an urban context or we're in a rural context. In the end, the land we're in relationship with is a land that's going to feed us if we look after it. And if we're not thinking about the broader context in an urban setting, or we're not thinking about our food security in a rural setting, we're shooting ourselves in the foot both ways. We can do huge damage to broad areas of land in an urban context and rural context. We can totally destroy land by overgrazing it in a rural context, and we can totally destroy land by engineering and designing it wrong in an urban context. We can totally make ourselves food insecure in a rural context by not thinking about it, by just running cattle and thinking that's going to be sweet. And we can just not, or one crop. And we can not think about it at all in in an urban context by even going, okay, I've got my little garden, but I'm not going to think about my broader area, about my broader community, about the forests that are around me or the landscape that is around me and the spare space that I do have in between the roads and houses. So our thinking needs to be both rural and urban in context, no matter where we are. We need to think big and small, no matter what context we're in, and we need to train ourselves to be able to do that.
There's a massive disconnect between the urban and the rural. In Australia, when we have big droughts and we're shipping out big ram bells for farmers to feed their stocks, feed their animals, and semi-trailer loads of material, forage going out to farmers in the big outback areas, we actually started to set up programs to feed a farmer. And the people in the cities, in the urban areas, saying, what do you mean feed a farmer? You don't need to feed farmers, they feed themselves. And I said, well, you're really disconnected, aren't you? You don't realize that farmers don't feed themselves anymore. When you talk to the farmers who are in the big droughts and you're out there in rural areas, they said, well, don't you garden? No, grandma used to do that. We don't do that anymore. That stopped. And urban people in the cities couldn't believe that you were actually proposing that we feed the farmers. We'd send food to the farmers. Aren't they the people that feed us? Actually, not in a way that they can feed themselves, because they're individual crops. The animals are starving because there's a drought. The crops have failed and they're only growing one crop. Yet a garden is easy to keep alive, so you can keep your farming family alive. That's gone. It's gone in the city. It's gone in the country. We're all gone. It's like everybody's forgetting grandma's skills. No one knows how to set a broody chicken anymore. No one knows even what that means. So there are patterns of what have we lost, and what could we gain by approaching it with pattern. So we know the production on urban gardens. The small garden is incredibly productive and is full of healthy nutrition, and much more diverse than anything we've ever had before, grown locally. What we've got now is kind of chemically grown food shipped all over the world. So everything's ripe all the time in the supermarket, which is totally unnatural. So what's ripe when it's grown locally, and what's available locally, and what can be processed locally? So you have your urban diversity, and then around it, potentially you have the perimeter urban, where calories can be grown, lots of fruits can be grown, larger crops can be grown, an extension of the garden in the broader perimeter urban. What the terminology is peri-urban. Outside of that, you can have rangeland on the appropriate slopes, and you can walk the animals into town for processing. And the inappropriate slopes can be farm forestry or products that are not food that can be grown on the steeper slope. So from the urban ag, perimeter urban ag, rangeland and forestry type products surrounding our populations, I've often made this statement that we could grow all our nutrition and human needs on the equivalent of 4 to 6% of the land we presently use. We don't want the same land because it's not surrounding populations in a patterned way. It's the patterning of land around populations that's crucial on this. 4 to 6% of the equivalent area we presently use. That points something out. The nutrition quality of what we're presently producing on these broad, unpanned, unnaturally panned, monoculture, flattened areas is very low. A lot of it is energy used to transport, and a lot of the food is lost in transport and spoiled before it gets to the consumer. So low quality, inefficiently produced, massive energy costs, and great destruction because of the way it's grown at a distance. People challenge me about that all the time. And I just say to people, you look at what people can grow in the famous permaculture gardens of the world. Look at the diversity, look at the volume of crop, and extrapolate that out through your urban area to your perimeter area, urban area. Rangeland is rangeland, whether you like it or not. Rangeland is productive. We can do it right, as long as it's not too steep, and then we can go into farm forestry. You have a new world, a new patterned world. So how do we inspire more people to become part of this shift? You might call that a radical fact. I don't call it a radical fact. I think it's absolute common sense. You can add those numbers up. But how, guys, how do we inspire people? How do we get people to say, hey, is that right? What those guys talk about? Is that right? Like, what were they talking about? Patterns and elements and diversity and combinations and understanding mapping and understanding this. But how do we shift it? Hopefully this podcast, but generally, what do we do? What do we do to encourage them? It's all getting very late in the day.
We have to make it as easy as possible. Unfortunately, for me, it's a design challenge. How do we make the right decision, the easiest decision, the most affordable decision, and the healthiest decision, right? Like Bill always said, he wants the hardest position possible, makes the best design. So unfortunately, we got a lot of rigged systems we're working against.
Well, circling back to community development and lowering the cost, joining other people that are of similar like mind. I was talking about the 3 types of people. You pay no mind to the naysayers and the people that don't think there's any problem. They love the current paradigm. They don't see any vulnerabilities or issues with it. You let those guys, keep their hands in their pocket on the side, and you join in your local community with people that have a clue, and you offer them a clear solution, and everybody champions that in their own way from their own background, skills, and cost sharing, time sharing, tool sharing. These are all clever ways to reduce time. Many hands make light work, and certified kitchens are expensive, just as an example. And if you guys came, you can co-op a kitchen, you can co-op a storefront. Taking all of those costs on yourself when everybody's already financially stressed is just a no-go. So identifying that winning solution, which is, I haven't found any better idea than suggesting a bioregional design and making sure all of those elements are met in your local area. That's it.
Often it's just sharing happy little accidents and sad little failures. I find with the permaculture group, I try and work out what they're doing. They're talking away and they're all interested and engaged. There's a great diversity of people in the permaculture group, local community permaculture group. And that's what Eric's set up. We're setting up a startup kit for anyone to set up one. But when you look at them, it's like, listen to them and say, what are they doing? They're just sharing happy little accents that have worked really well and sad little failures you don't want to repeat. just refining the action and
Yeah.
improving the pattern.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of, townships and local governments that people in those governments might be open to these suggestions, but it's just a matter of somebody that's enthusiastic, has the permaculture lens, sees the opportunities in face of, permaculture is fine, making the problem the solution, right? And all of the world's problems can be solved in the garden, if you ask Geoff. And those are nice little things that help ease anxiety, and it's very true, and that's what we need to be doing. So that's why I'm here, happy to be working with you guys, because you guys have a clue.
I think it's people need tangible tastes of how it gets done, and I think that involves an education. That involves people seeking an education in these things, and therefore then talking from an educated point of view, and also people seeking it done right. So that would mean a good design implemented well, either in the community, or if you don't have it, outsourced. Bring someone in who can do it, like people who offer consultation services. Getting it done well so that it looks incredible. Getting it done well so that you can really envision and really understand and explain what's possible and how it's going to work. And for us to go on that education journey together, because we have lost it. We've generationally lost the knowledge of how to take care of our own needs. We've become a collective totally dependent on very fragile systems. And it's a shame, because historically that doesn't work. We can look at the fall of any empire, any city in the past, and we can pretend it's not going to happen to us, but in reality it will. And we can get it. It will. I mean, it's just a historical fact where the systems that we have in place will collapse at some point in time. That's not up for debate, and it is not hard to get ready for it, but we have to want to. If we don't want to, we won't.
So if we're linked to a natural system that's been there forever, evolving beautifully, we have more security. So what kind of world do you envision if we all started designing food security today? What kind of world do you envision? And what do you want? I'm putting this out there to all of you guys. Like, what do you want people to take away from this conversation? I mean, what do you envision if we all started designing sustainable systems today, and creating food security? All start. And then
I'll pick that ball
what
up
do you want
and run
people
with
to take away from this?
So the same thing that I talked about before, about that food forest in Iraq and how they've been done throughout the world, that's an example that's lasted thousands of years through the Persian Empire, through the Roman Empire, and through the empires of today. We have clear examples of actually what it looks like that exists today. We do. And to envision what the future could look like or what the present could look like, history always helps. The study of history is what historians bang on about, is we need to learn from history. And this is a clear example. These are people that have survived with economic surplus, never go hungry because they've got such stable systems, and they have done so for thousands of years, and they're still here today. We have them. And there is no reason why we can't replicate their systems if we so choose. No reason why we can't do it. None whatsoever. So I envision a future like their present and like their past. And like all of our pasts, if we dig back far enough, we've all got historic links to that. So I envision a life where we're full of food security, full of security generally. We live happy, meaningful lives where we enrich the planet around us, and we have lots of spare time to do beautiful, good things for the world around us.
Anyone want to add to that? Sounds great to me.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's very simple. Peace and abundance. And this is not a utopian fantasy. As you say, all the world's problems can be solved in a garden, because all the world's problems are based on how we supply our needs. So if we don't start supplying our needs locally, and we don't have food security that affects how we make our basic decisions. And what I want people to take away is we can all do it ourselves, and we must do it ourselves because no one's coming to do it for us.
Ben,
Well-
we're going to get them to map the whole world so we can do it quick.
Yeah. I see hundreds of jobs that are encompassed inside of the last chapter of the Permaculture Design Manual on page 510. The blueprint is there. We have, I don't know, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of ancient examples and current examples of people taking a class, going home and experimenting and building their demonstration sites. And I'm just like myself as a permaculture designer, longing to engage my local community. They might not have that confidence or a clear blueprint that they could demonstrate their site, but like, what are you advocating for on a more on one tier up? It's not a garden, it's not a eco village, it's a bioregional, like hundreds of people engaged in this. And what I envision is a reburgeoning of the middle class, where that gap has been growing for so long, and people have been stuck in jobs that they might find soulless, and it doesn't matter what your background is. You could be very mechanically inclined, you could be a photographer, you could be a map maker, you could be somebody that likes to play with plant medicine or herbs, whatever it is your background skill is, you can adapt it to this bioregional matrix and focus your inner talents inward to this larger mission and really, blow this thing up in a very, it'd be a renaissance. It'd be very creative, artistic, good regionally, locally sourced food. It would be magical. Yeah. So like you said, Sam, back what it used to be like, we could have that again.
We could all have 5 careers running concurrently, 1 major career, 2 minor careers, and 2 very occasional careers, and we'd be a lot happier than getting stuck in 1 boring career. And Bill quoted that in the book. So as our final words, I'd like everyone to know that we design for abundance, not just for ourselves, but for people we'll never meet. And that's the point. It's not about just doing things for ourselves. It's we're doing this for everybody and for the planet, because we believe, we don't just believe, we know that this is the answer. We can design our way out of these issues. And there you go, folks. Another great podcast. We'll see you next time. Stay tuned. Buckle in. It's all going to be good and exciting.